Hello, welcome again to my YouTube channel, Old School English Teacher. Today we're going to talk about the second magical tool or rhetorical strategy, description. Let's get started. Description is how we invite the reader into the experience that we're writing about. When we describe, we allow the reader to see our experience, and we do this by showing rather than telling. Description also creates a dominant mood or impression, and this creates an emotional atmosphere of our story, and that's very, very important. Now, here's an example of a sad little paragraph because it has no descriptive details. Our first house was horrible. I was embarrassed that we had bought such a dump, but it was all we could afford. I definitely had buyer's remorse. Nothing wrong with this little paragraph, but it doesn't invite the reader into the experience. Let's see a little improvement with just a few descriptive details. In 1973, my husband and I bought our first home in Los Angeles, California. Even from the curb, it looked derelict. Peeling gray paint exposed patches of wood the size of my hand. One black shutter leaned against the house, and another hung askew by one nail. I walked across the front yard, which was more weeds than grass, and gripped the house key, asking myself, "What did we buy?" At the top of the front steps, termite droppings settled under the threshold of the front door. I slipped the key into the lock, opened the door, and stepped onto the green shag carpet. Fleas jumped onto my ankles, biting me with tenacity. I stood and took in the red and black wallpaper peeling from the walls and green drapes drooping from bent curtain rods. Okay, so this bit of writing that has more descriptive details never says, "I regret buying this house." The writer never says it was a dump. The writer never says it was derelict. The writer has shown us through descriptive details all of those things. So through effective descriptions, writers lead the reader towards significance and truth. And what I mean by this is that in the preceding paragraph, the writer showed us the buyer's remorse. The writer showed us the horrible house. The writer showed us that it was a dump. The writer never had to tell us, okay? And that's what I mean by leading the reader towards significance and truth. And we do that by showing rather than telling. Okay, there's 4 ways that we describe. We describe through naming, detailing, comparing, and appealing to the senses. And we're going to examine each one of those in turn. Okay, here's a sad little sentence, and you know why it's sad. There's no descriptive detail. My grandpa's truck sat in the field behind his house. Now, when you name objects, be specific and concrete. For example, my grandfather's 1943 Ford truck had not moved from the field behind his barn in 20 years. So just with these 2 details, we get a picture of what's going on. Now, when we consider details, these are the questions we want to ask ourselves. What size is it? How many? What is it made of? Where is it located? The shape, value, texture, and condition. Now, we wouldn't want to do all of these unless we're writing a manual. That it's very important to have all these details, but for descriptive writing, we would just pick a few of those. And I'll give you an example. So, we have a little paragraph here with no descriptive details. My dog ran through the field. He came home excited, but his coat was dirty. He sat still while I brushed his dirty coat. Okay, we're going to get this a little bit more vivid with some descriptive details. My black Alaskan Husky takes off through the cornfields behind our house. She returns, and her eyes are ablaze from her short run of freedom. Then she sits patiently while I brush her coat, releasing a shower of leaf fragments and burrs that fall around my feet. Okay, so just a few details. The writer has invited us into this little moment. We know the breed of the dog and the color. What kind of field? They're cornfields. We see a little description of the dog's eyes because of her little bit of freedom. We see her sitting patiently, and we see the leaf fragments and the burrs falling around the feet of the owner. So those little details are inviting the reader into the experience. Okay, now we're going to talk about comparing, and we do that with the simile and the metaphor. Now, the simile is a figure of speech in which the similarity between two objects is expressed. And a simile is introduced with like or as, and we have this example from Annie Dillard. The weasel was as thin as a curve. Notice as and as. She is making a comparison. She's comparing the similarities between the weasel and a curve. There's our weasel. Okay, now let's look at the metaphor. It's also a method of comparing. A metaphor is an implied analogy. He was 10 inches long, a muscled ribbon. He wasn't literally a muscled ribbon, but Annie Dillard has made an analogy. She's made a comparison between a muscled ribbon and the physique of the weasel. Okay, so that is the difference. Now, our fourth way to describe is by appealing to the senses. And I like to consider the apple in my hand. And what does it look like? What does it feel like? How does it sound when I crunch into it? What does it smell like? What does it taste like? That's how we appeal to the senses. So, I've got a couple of really sad sentences here because there's no sensory details. I picked the apple and bit into it. It tasted really good. Okay, kind of flat, kind of boring. Let's see what we can do to make it a little bit more interesting. I picked the Macintosh from the lowest branch, and before I bit into its cool, taut skin, I inhaled the sweet aroma of the shiny red apple. We just addressed touch and smell. That made the sentence come alive. So we don't have to overburden our sentences with too many details, but just a few, and we can really make our sentences come alive. Okay, this is a gentle reminder to avoid cliches, because a lot of times we use them to describe, but we don't want to. Busy as a bee, that is a simile. She's more fun than a barrel of monkeys. His nose stands out like a sore thumb, another simile. It would be more accurate to describe what really happened to his nose. He walked into a sliding glass door, broke his nose, and it swelled to 3 times its size. See, that's a little bit more accurate, and we get a better picture. So again, we're going to avoid those cliches. Okay, I've got a little trick for you. It's a 2-part trick, and it's going to help you always write vivid, descriptive sentences, if you remember to do it. Okay, we're going to avoid abstract words like beautiful, ugly, wonderful, awesome, boring. We're going to avoid them. We can use them sparingly, but if we do use them, we need to prove them later on in the paragraph. But for example, if we said, a beautiful woman walked into the room, okay, then we're expecting a description. She had flawless, beautiful, bronze skin. Okay? I saw my cousin. She looked wonderful. Well, that's kind of subjective. It's kind of vague. I saw my cousin. She was wearing a white silk dress with a lace jacket. See, we get a picture. I took a hike. I saw awesome views. I get the word awesome in my student essays a lot. Okay. Instead, we could say, I hiked up Strawberry Mountain and saw hundreds of acres of pine trees. We created a picture. I had a boring Sunday with my in-laws. Okay, how about I was trapped at my in-laws for 3 hours while they showed us pictures from their vacation in Europe. Okay, see, it's a little different. Just a little bit more details, and we've got a picture. And we've pulled our readers into our experience. Okay, the second part of the trick is to be specific rather than general. So you might say in your personal narrative, well, I gobbled up my food and ran off to class. Well, it might be important to mention what you ate because that might be an important detail for the readers. I ate my broccoli, my mashed potatoes, and some yummy fried chicken. Or I came home at midnight and there was some animal on my front porch. I came home at midnight and there was a pig on my front porch. See the difference? So instead of saying house, we would say Cape Cod. Instead of tree, we would say Palo Verde. Instead of flower, we would say hibiscus. And instead of dog, we would say poodle. So you get it. You want to be specific rather than general. Okay, I have a student practice for you. I want you to revise the following sentence using descriptive details. Remember, we're going to show rather than tell, to create a dominant impression and to render truth and significance. Here is my very boring sentence. It really needs some help. The woman walked across the street towards the park. So press pause and see what you can do to that sentence to make it vivid and inviting. Okay, so this is what I came up with. The elderly woman tapped her cane to negotiate the damaged sidewalk. Without looking to see if it was safe to cross, she stepped into traffic. Taxis slammed on brakes and came to a stop until she ambled onto the curb and turned towards Central Park. Okay, I'm sure you wrote a better one. All right, now I have a second student practice. This one is more challenging because it's longer and there are more steps involved. But I want you to take the time to do this because this is a very valuable practice. I want you to write a first-person narrative in past tense. For this practice, you are going to combine the narrative and description, so you're blending two rhetorical modes. And you're going to say, well, what do I write about? Well, take 20 minutes and write nonstop, doing clustering and free writing. Tap into your unconscious and pull up some old memories. When you've got one or two, take one of those memories and test it against Aristotle's Poetics to see if this story can sustain 6 paragraphs, say. And if it can, then organize your story according to Aristotle's Poetics. That will really simplify your organizational strategy. I want you to use a variety of sentence structures. Use the simple, use the compound, use the complex, and of course the compound complex. Now if you get a little frustrated and befuddled with the sentence structures, just write with the sentence structures you feel most comfortable. Maybe it's the simple sentence. Just write all simple sentences. And then you can go back and combine them, play with them, and make them say exactly what you want them to. And then remember that trick, using concrete, specific, descriptive details. Concrete and specific, always. We don't want to be vague, and we don't want to be general. Okay, aim for 3 to 6 paragraphs and for your story. Okay, and then you're saying, gosh, this is a lot of work. Is this really practical? And I went over the practical applications for the narrative, but I'm going to review them again because I think it's important. The personal narrative is very useful when you go into an interview of any kind. If you can tell a story that illustrates your best qualities, how you are organized, how you are a good team player, how you're creative, how you problem solve, tell a story. It's much better than just using abstract descriptive details to talk about yourself, because the interviewer is going to remember you and they're going to remember your stories. College applications, whether you're applying to a four-year school or graduate school. Undoubtedly, they will ask in their application for a story. They're not going to say a story. They're going to say, tell us about a time when you faced a big challenge. How did you face that challenge? What did you do? Well, you're going to tell a story. They may ask you something about your childhood that shaped you. You're going to tell a specific story, because the readers of these applications will remember the stories. You want to stand out. You are competing against hundreds, maybe thousands of other candidates. Social situations. It's always fun to go to a work social, a church social, a neighborhood social, a family social, and have some stories to tell. They break the ice. They really make a party a party. Now, be considerate of your audience. You might not tell the same story to your mother-in-law as you would to your coworkers. So always be aware of audience in a social situation. When you give a speech or a presentation, it's always good to begin with a story, because it shows that you are human, you are reaching out to your audience, and they will be receptive and they will listen to you if you have connected with them on an emotional level before you give your presentation or your speech. And as I've said before, writing our stories is healing. It's good to reflect on things that have happened to us and how we've handled it. It also provides a legacy for those who follow us. You know, your children, your grandchildren, your great-grandchildren, they're going to think you lived a very interesting life because you lived in 2019, 2020, but you think it's just humdrum. It's important to write these little stories down so that they can see that you are a real, living, breathing person. Okay, my reading recommendation is Malcolm Gladwell. He is a Canadian journalist, and he's not a sociologist, but he writes a lot about social problems. And his book, The Tipping, he talks about how little things make a huge difference. And it is usually little things that cause a gigantic trend or phenomenon. I don't agree with everything that he says in The Tipping Point, but I highly recommend all of his books because he is an amazing critical thinker. He will draw conclusions from the things that he observes, and I think it's a real talent, and I think everyone should appreciate what he does. His second book is Outliers, and he talks about how genius is overrated and how that success is, being persistent and working hard. He comes up with this very interesting figure of 10,000 hours to master a skill or a talent. And he says whether you're a physician, a teacher, a mechanic, a writer, it takes 10,000 hours to perfect your skill. And I thought, whoa, okay, we all need to get busy, don't we? Okay, so anything written by Malcolm Gladwell, I highly recommend. He's very provocative and very interesting. So I hope that you will persist with your personal narratives using lots of vivid description, lots of good sentence structure. And with that, I wish you goodbye, good luck, and good writing.